And so God passes a message to us. I mean, imagine yourself, just try to imagine a medical doctor is trying to attend to a patient who is in emergency, and a mechanic or someone whose only job was to sell pure water walks up and said, "Doctor, this is the way you should do it." Is he going to say, "Okay, tell me how to do"? You just tell him, you look at him from head to toe, get out here, what do you know? Exactly, what do you know? You've spent your whole life selling pure water. You've been dealing with spanners and so on, and you're coming here to tell me how to hold scissors and how to hold whatever you use in cutting somebody. Please just get out of my way. Let me do my work. Must have been the same with St. Peter and his companions. These men walked the whole night. They went fishing since last evening, and not even one single fish did they catch. Not even one. They were disappointed, they were frustrated, and they decided to wash their nets, clean up the boat, and go home. They're not just lucky today. And somebody just walked up and said to them, "Hey, put out your net for a catch. Never enter water. Never fish before." Because they know themselves. They know themselves. Just like every profession around a place, they know themselves, know each other. He's never been a fisherman. And he's saying, "Put out your net and catch for a catch." Paul just looked at him from head to toe. But again, St. Peter gives us a lesson. Not to underestimate the power of God in any circumstances. And so he hoped and followed the instruction and tried it. And what we are seeing is a miracle that none of them expected. That their own boats were filled up, that they were now able to call the others to come and share in the blessings that has become theirs. And we are told even they too, their own boat was filled up, that they started sinking. As I said, the readings of today has to do with the call of these three individuals. It also has to do with these three individuals who were not saints, who were not extraordinary people. They were just simple people who were sinners like anybody else. They had their own failings and they had their own difficulties and limitations. And yet they were the ones that God picked. And they were the ones that God used. And the words of St. Paul in the reading of today tells us very clearly, even St. Paul himself acknowledged that he was not worthy to be called to that mission. But the grace of God is what called him there. And we must always keep that in mind. You know, St. Paul says he worked very hard, but he acknowledged that it wasn't because he worked very hard. It was the grace of God that made him an apostle, because he was not worthy of that name. Given all that he did, he stood on the way to make sure that the message of God did not go anywhere. And yet he's the same person that God used. St. Peter the same, a man of weakness, an irrational man. He was the same person that God chose. And the prophet Isaiah portrays the same image. He said he's not worthy. But eventually he had to give in and said, "Well, here I am, Lord. Send me." We must learn to allow that attitude to pervade our lives as followers of Jesus. To acknowledge first of all that every one of us who has been called by God is a sinner, is a person who is limited, is a person who is not worthy of the call that God has given to each one of us by virtue of our baptism. But also to acknowledge the fact that even in our limitation, God can use us to achieve something very mighty. God can use us to achieve something very mighty. And that's a lesson that we need to learn. Because if we can learn that lesson well, it also helps in the way we relate to one another. That someone has made a mistake today is not the reason to think that the person is useless. Every one of us has a potential. Every one of us can be mighty if only we can open ourselves to God and allow God to use us. Christianity is not a religion to be promoted.